Hello everyone, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com, and welcome to this special edition of The Final Bar. We're on vacation this week, but wanted to share with you some of the little behind the scenes work in terms of how we identify stocks and how we analyze them for the top 10 charts series that we've done here on StockCharts TV. I've sat down with Grayson Roze once a month. We've each brought 5 stocks to the table. We debate and discuss the charts and think about the 5 names that each of us have thrown in the bucket. And now, as we've been doing it a little while, it's interesting to sort of get in a rhythm to figure out how we're going to select those names, how we monitor those names going forward, and how we would manage risk. And that's really what we're going to do with this 3-part series starting today. Step 1, how do we find the next great chart, right? How would we identify the stocks that deserve a spot in that top 10 charts list that we would comprise every month? And I'll show you some of the scans, some of the tools that I use on StockCharts.com to identify those. The second thing will be really updating on how the stocks have performed since we added them. We'll look at the specials that we did in Q2. We'll now update them now that we're in July at the beginning of the third quarter of this year, and look at how these things have performed since we identify them. What's changed, what's evolved, what's really looked very similar to when we originally picked them. And then the third one is going to be all about managing risk. This is something I think is so important. Anytime you select something for a portfolio, for a list, you always have to think about the potential downside risk. So we'll share with you how people like Grace and I actually think about risk management from a technical analysis perspective as we're selecting these names. With that in mind, let's get to today's session, which is how to find the next great chart. And when I think about that, I immediately gravitate to the scanning engine. The scanning engine on StockCharts.com is a very powerful, and I would argue underutilized tool to help you identify stocks that fit certain criteria. So we're going to use that heavily today for a couple different ideas. And I would say there's a couple different ways we can go about finding stocks. And these are some of the tools that I use to actually identify the names that we include in those top 10 chart lists that we comprise every month. The first thing I would suggest is start with the scooter rankings. The StockCharts technical ranking is a proprietary model designed by the StockCharts crew years ago, and we've tweaked it over time, but overall it's remained fairly consistent, and it combines a couple of different time frames to identify stocks that have certain characteristics. And I should have started with a caveat that we will be using the scanning engine a little bit, and if you're not familiar with it, we have other resources on StockCharts.com that we'll include in the description to get you more information about the scanning engine, how to create your own scans. But what I would tell you is in the current iteration, and I say that because we are actively working on the next version of the scanning engine, but for now, I would encourage you to use the drop-down menus at the bottom. The way that this basically works is this is your workspace where you set your scan criteria. You can create new ones and save different ones. And it literally just, you're building this simple program with the drop-down menus, and it'll create the language and the vernacular that you need. You don't have to know how to program or code, and I certainly don't. You just have to know how to pick things off of a menu, which I think all of us are pretty capable of doing. So things like the StockCharts technical ranking being above a certain level, all I would do is click on Scooter, hit add, and then when I go up here, you can see that it's added this argument. I already have it up there, so I just wanted to show you as an introduction. But if you're struggling with what to put in your scans, by the way, I would start with our predefined scans, because these are the ones that we have already built that we run automatically every day, and we share the results on a different reporting page. So this is a great place to go, and if you bring one of them up, you'll see the syntax that is used to actually create that argument. That's another way to sort of learn the language, because once you know how this works, you can make little tweaks and things like that. So here I'm doing a simple scan, basically saying, let's see, I want a stock with a decent amount of volume. The StockCharts technical ranking is above 90. The market cap's above 10 billion, which means I'm kind of looking at large cap stocks. It traded in one of the major U.S. exchanges, and I want to eliminate the ETFs. That is something that I like having in my scans, because sometimes I do want to include ETFs, sometimes I don't. So by having that argument, you can cancel it if you want to get rid of it, or you can keep it enabled. So here I'm just going to say I want stocks with a scooter ranking above 90. It's traded in the U.S. and it's not an ETF, and we run the scan. So here we have 100 stocks that come up on this list. What I always do from this point, there are a couple things you can do. You can quickly go to a quick preview chart, but I like to manage the list a little bit first and put it in a chart list, because then you have a lot more capability. So what I personally do is sort it by industry and then sector. And what that does is it groups all the communication services stocks together first, and then it sorts them by industry group. Then I get to consumer discretionary. All the restaurants are together, all the specialty retailers. That's a great way to sort of manage the list in my own experience. You click Save to ChartList. It'll give you a name that basically has the name of the scan and a date. I'm going to select number in sorted order, which means however I have it sorted here, it's going to give me the list in that order. And now we're going through the results. What I like to do there is go right to a chart list view, because then I can just flip through the charts. For me, my goal is to get to a list of charts as quickly as possible and flick through them. So here I'm looking, the first one that comes to mind is probably one that if I was doing the top 10 charts to watch for today, I probably would look at something like Tencent, because for me, it's a pretty decent chart in that it's a long-term strong chart. It's pulled back in the short term to an ascending 50-day moving average. If you've watched those top 10 chart specials that I've mentioned, you'll know that these are the types of charts that Grayson and I love to highlight. So finding this as the first one off is just kind of perfect. I actually didn't look at this ahead of time, but I'm thrilled that it came up with a good working example. So for me, it's good. I like having examples like this, and then I like to just go through them. And what I honestly do is I have a notebook and I go through, and as I'm going through scans, the way I like to do it is totally old school. Jot down the tickers. I write the name of the scan. I start jotting down the tickers. I usually order my list by sector. So I have the sectors down the bottom, the name of the scan, and then I just jot down the tickers that are of interest to me. GoDaddy's another one that's just been incredibly strong and consistent. So this is a very simple scan. This is not a very intricate scan. It's just looking at stocks that have a strong technical ranking. And as I go through, a lot of these names are things like the Magnificent Seven names, which you probably already have seen or you know of. It's going to be names like cruise lines that have had really nice performance, because to have a high scooter ranking, you have to have a pretty decent performance run on a couple different time frames, long-term to short-term. So these are the kind of stocks that I would sort of go through and maybe identify a couple of them that seem most interesting. I usually end up with way more than 5 ideas, and then I go through and add them to a watch list and start to dig in them a little bit further. Costco, by the way, is one that we've put in. I don't think this last one in July, but maybe in June. I feel like Costco is probably on the list because it's had a pretty decent performance. So idea number one is to just use a very simple proprietary model that we already have managed. We've done a bunch of analytics over time to find technical configurations that tend to represent strong trends with positive momentum that are most likely to do well going forward. So a high scooter ranking is my first suggestion as to where to start. And again, it's a starting point. It's not the ending point. It's not going to give you the final list, but it gives you a list of charts to start to work through. Second idea, and once you have the scanning engine, you can click on the little drop down and find another scan that you want. I have this one called, which one is it? Pullback, I think it was. Pullback using moving averages. Now this one's a little busy, so let me just translate into English what this is doing. And to be honest with you, a while ago, I was just trying to find different ways of looking for stocks that had been doing pretty well, but it started to pull back. And those are the types of names that I like to trade and that I like to highlight for our viewers. So I was toying with a number of different things. I looked at RSI, I looked at stochastics, a couple different indicators, and I came up with this idea of using a series of moving average comparisons. So this is basically just saying I want mid-cap stocks or greater. The current price is higher than the 50-day moving average. The 20-day is higher than the 50-day. The 20-day simple moving average is higher than it was 5 days ago. But then the highs are getting lower. So today's high is lower than yesterday's high. Yesterday's lower than 2 days ago. 2 days ago is lower than 3 days ago. So basically, it's a stock that has been doing very well, but in the last couple days, the highs have been getting lower. That was just an idea that I came up with. And I think this represents the type of thing you can do to just experiment with more specific scans to come up with a better working list. So this comes up with 45 stocks as I run it today. As I mentioned, I like to sort it by industry and then sector. That kind of puts it in a more meaningful order to me. I number in sorted order. We hit execute. All right, so here again, what I like to do is just go right to the list of charts. So these are a little bit different because these are some where the moving averages are starting to slope higher. But like the first one, Liberty Broadband, is one that's just starting to rotate higher. And I actually love coming up with ideas like this. You'll notice if you go back through some of the top 10 specials that we've done, I often will throw in one of these. I'll call them a bottom fishing candidate, which traditionally isn't the type of name I'm usually looking for, but I love finding things that have been going down that are no longer going down, that are now starting to rotate higher. And so I think something like Liberty Broadband getting above that resistance could be really interesting. That would mean a break above 55. So this is the kind of thing I'd probably jot down, maybe put on a watch list, maybe set an alert for $55 and say, tell me when Liberty Broadband breaks above 55. Then I can go right back to this chart and analyze it. I love that feature on StockCharts. Yeah, and so something like this, Ross Stores might be one that looks interesting to me, right? You can see that it's had a nice, 6 weeks of performance, but the last week or two have been a little bit weaker. We're bumping up against resistance around 150. It's potentially making a nice higher low if it can rotate higher, and then if it did, it would be making a cup and handle pattern potentially up here at the top. So I love finding this type of pattern that is not completed yet, but it's ready. Same thing. What I would probably do with this is add it on a watch list of ideas, and I would put an alert for Ross Stores above 150. I'm actually jotting it down right now because I think it's an interesting one to pay attention to. And all that tells you is if and when we get above that 150 level, then I revisit it. So during the month, I actually like to set some of these with alerts, and then I'll have them ready if they trigger before we do the special. I'll know that that's something I may want to highlight. Royal Caribbean is another one. The cruise lines look kind of like this, where they've had a nice run of performance, pulled back in the last week or two, pulling back to an ascending 50-day moving average, kind of like that setup of strong long-term, weak short-term, and maybe an opportunity to buy on the dips before the next move higher. So idea number 2 is use things like moving averages, different technical indicators, make more, maybe complicated is not a great word, but maybe a more detailed scan to refine your list. I think with the scanning engine in general, you have two general ways of doing it. Go for a very broad set of conditions so you can get to a list of charts and then go through the charts. And it's a little more manual, but at least you have a good working list to go with. Or you try to find very specific configurations, use different technical indicators to refine a very ideal pattern that you're looking for. You're going to have much fewer results, but they may be more meaningful because to hit all of those, to check all those boxes in your scan, they're really going to have to be a pretty idealized chart setup. So second idea, use something like this. Here I'm using moving averages to look for pullback candidates. Final scan idea I will show you is very simple, which is just looking at a broad list of stocks. And what I honestly do, I actually do this every weekend, is I look at this scan here, where we're at, S&P 500 in sector, hold on, it's here somewhere. Let's see, S&P, SPX weekly buys, SPX 13-week highs and lows, that's good. No, right at the top. I was going to say, I think I have it right at the top here. This is just a simple way of getting the S&P 500 stocks into a list. I like to sort it by industry and then sector. I like to do it right like this. And then I literally, in a very manual process, start at the very top and I start to go down through the stocks. This is a very manual process, and this came to me, and this was introduced to me from my analysts when I worked at Fidelity. I ran the technical research department at Fidelity for over 8 years and up in Boston. And when I did so, I was surprised when I went up there and my analysts, a lot of them printed out charts, but a lot of them would do this sort of routine every day, every week. They would sit down in the same chair. They would have the little cup of coffee the same way. They would have their same pencil, and they would look through the charts and do the same routine. And it struck me how the consistency of that routine was so powerful, right? It wasn't about having this perfect moment and having this perfect idea for this perfect time. It was just the discipline of going through the motions the same way every day, every week, and doing it consistently. And what that would allow you to do, as I picked up those good habits from my analysts, was what it allowed me to do was just really stay on top of movements, because as you looked at the same set of charts every week, every day, every month, whatever the routine was, you would see things evolve, because you can compare this week to the previous week and you'd say, oh, last week it looked like this. Boy, this week it's doing something different. Interesting. I want to maybe highlight that. So what I love about looking at the S&P 500 stocks, and you can make it a smaller list if you want, but I like to look at basically the major stocks in the US, is just look at the patterns that are meaningful. And when you do that, you might find something like a Fox Corporation, which has been in a nice uptrend off of a March low, making higher highs and higher lows, and it's testing resistance as we're recording this around 32.50. I could come up with some scan that would help me identify names in a nice uptrend, potentially breaking out and all of that. But just going through a broad list of charts and just flipping through the charts quickly, you call this more of a visual scan. I'm not looking for a very specific criteria. I'm just visually looking for charts that are of interest. And then when I see something that jumps out at me, then I jot down the ticker. Then I think a little bit more about, all right, why did that chart look so interesting? What am I seeing? Where are we at relative to key levels? Is there a particular technical configuration that I might be able to identify that would help me recognize potentially an area of strength or weakness? So the third idea is to go with a very broad list of stocks. Look at the technology sector, look at the S&P 500, the S&P 100, look at the Dow 30, start with that, and just look at the charts and see which ones, out of a group of 30 or 50 or 100 stocks, which charts look most interesting to you. Jot those down and then focus on those. Out of that group of stocks that look interesting, which are the ones that are most ideal within that group? And that's the way you can refine a very large list to a very small working list very, very quickly. By the way, before we get any further, I do want to let you know as a reminder, if you like this sort of analysis, looking at the scanning engine, trying to identify key charts at key moments, building chart lists and managing ideas and using the alert system to help you identify potential entry and exit points, now is a perfect time to become a StockCharts paid member. Around the 4th of July holiday, all through this week, we're going to be doing a special. If you go to StockCharts.com/special, you'll find out how you can get up to 2 months free. If you've never been a paid member, now is a perfect time to join StockCharts as a paid member. Take advantage of all these tools that I'm highlighting today. By the way, if you are a current member now, go to StockCharts.com/special, because if you continue your subscription today and extend it, we'll just add that with the special deal to the end of your current membership date, and as a result, you can lock in the good savings right now. So go to StockCharts.com/special for more information on our premium memberships. That's it, folks. That's the way that I would identify the next great chart. These are the tools that I've used to identify some of the names that we've highlighted in our top 10 chart specials that we've been running on the channel probably for over a year now, if I remember right. We put a link in the description below to some of those specials if you want to review some of the charts that we've highlighted and we've identified using these tools that I shared with you today. And by the way, this is the first of 3 episodes. The next episode will update on some of the specific stocks that we highlighted in some of those previous specials, what they've done since we identified them, what worked and what didn't, what did we learn from that. And then the third episode will be all about risk management. How do we manage risk once we've identified some of these names? For StockCharts in Redmond, Washington, I'm Dave Keller. Be well, stay safe, have a good one.